Wonderful. So let's get started. I'm just going to open this kit and pull out one of the balls of yarn. It's done in what's called a rag yarn. I just need to put my microphone back on. Sorry, everybody. Are we there? Okay. All right. Hopefully that's better. Sorry about that. So this is what's known as a rag yarn. And rag yarn is two strands twisted together. So you have a lighter color, maybe it's an undyed wool. This is an acrylic, so it's not going to be undyed, but it's usually a white or a neutral color twisted together with another color. And you can see there, I can actually pull those apart if I wanted to. So they're twisted. And here's a little bit of knitting trivia here. Oh, I see Christy Scruggs has joined us. Hi, Christy. Thank you for joining. The word rag is probably from Norwegian origin. Ragsokk, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, means a heavy sock of coarse wool. And from the Old Norse rog, R-O-G-G, it means tuft and shagginess. I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right, but that's where the word comes from. So I do recommend that you do a swatch. You will see here, can you see that okay? Okay. The swatch here is, the gauge here is in a 2-inch measurement. Okay, you've got 8 stitches, which is 1 repeat of the pattern to 2 inches, and you've got 12 rows to 2 1/4 inches. That's the gauge that you're trying to achieve. If your gauge isn't quite right, you can go up a needle size if it's too tight, or you can go down a needle size if it's too loose, and just play about with it until you get the right gauge. It is important on this because we're doing rows to try and get the row gauge right as well, but it is
just as important, if not more important, to get the width gauge right. So your 8 stitches to 2 inches. That's one repeat of the pattern. Now, you can't just knit a square of 2 inches and measure it. That's not going to work for you. We've talked about gauge before, but I always like to knit a bigger swatch. So I knit much more than it needs to be, because I want to measure 4 inches. And I did this, I blocked it out, and it is giving me the gauge that I want. So I know that works well. Okay. So remember, when you measure it, you can sort of double that up. So what I did, I wanted to know that I'd got 16 inches to 4 inches and 24 rows to 4.5 inches. Okay. But you need to make a bigger swatch to measure your gauge, whatever it is. And you're doing the swatch in the garter check pattern. Don't do it in stockinette stitch. The gauge says to do it in the garter check pattern. So that's what you do. Okay, let me show you now the other things you'll need. You will need a size 10, US 10 pair of knitting needles, or a circular. I'm doing mine on a circular. I'll explain how I do that in a minute. That's a 6mm needle in European sizing. So it's a US 10 or a 6mm needle. You will need stitch markers. You only need a few of them, but I recommend these, the ones that slide on the needle. If you've only got these type of things, that's fine. You can still slide those on the needle. What you don't want to be doing is have to keep unpicking them, unclasping them, I mean. So as long as it can slide on the needle and off the needle, that's fine. I would highly recommend that you have a row counter of some sort. If it's not a little mechanical row counter or a digital one, then a pen and paper will do. But you need to keep track of the stitch pattern to get you started. Well, I use it all the time, actually, because it's very easy if you stop and look up, if you're knitting and you're watching TV, to forget the row that you're on. So make life easy for yourself, use a row counter. Now, the knitting order is usually to start with the back. And I would recommend that you do that so that you get used to the stitch pattern. I am going to show you what I did on the front, because I want to show you the 2 different stitch patterns that you'll be working with. Another tip that I always suggest, depending on the size that you're doing, is to go through the pattern first and highlight it. So I've chosen to do the large size, so I've highlighted everything that relates to that size. It makes life a lot easier, especially when you're looking at numbers for pattern repeats and things like that. Okay, so let me explain now the stitch pattern. So the garter check pattern, this looks onerous, but it really isn't. It works over a multiple of 8 stitches plus 1. And what that means is that when you get to that section, this is my garter check pattern. Once I get to the end of that section, which is marked with my row counter there, my stitch marker. So I have a stitch marker there that separates the front band of the cardigan, and this one separates from when I've done the main part of that garter check pattern. So it's a repeat of 8 stitches, but then it's 1 stitch. Oh, there's Michael Paul joined us too. Hi Michael, hello. So it's an 8 stitch pattern repeat, and then when you get to the very last one, it's plus 1. So depending on the size that you're doing, you might have 3 repeats, you might have 4, whatever it is, then it's plus 1. That's what that means. It's plus 1 in that section. Your rows 1, 3 and 5 are all the same, and those will all be right side rows. Rows 7, 9 and 11 are different. Those are still right side rows. Rows 2, 4 and 6 are your wrong side rows, and rows 8 and 10 are also your wrong side row, and so is row 12, which is the last row in the repeat. At the same time, you are working 2 rows of the seeded rib over 19 stitches, regardless of the size that you're doing. That doesn't change. And row 1 is always going to be the right side, row 2 is going to be the wrong side. Now that sounds a lot, but let me show you how to get started. You're going to work on the back when you start yours, so you'll only be doing the garter check. I'm going to work on a front piece. Just before I do, let me show you, I'm working on a circular needle because I like these needles and that's the side that I have. But I'm not joining it. I'm not joining to go work into the round. All I do, I start knitting this way. I'm just going to knit my first row of the seeded rib there. So I knit 3 stitches, and so on and so on. When I get to the end, I just turn round. I'll unpick those. Let's pretend I've just done a row. I turn round. My yarn will be at this end then. I'm still working right and left. Gail Stobbart, hi, thank you for joining us. So you're not joining in the round. It just means you can get a lot more stitches on your needle if you want to. But bring the non-working end, if you will, of the needle round to meet, just as you would hold your ordinary straight needles. What you don't want to be doing, I don't like this, some people knit so that this is at the front. I would get out of that habit, because when you do knit in the round, you're going to be knitting inside rather than outside. Okay, so all you do when you're knitting on a circular needle, and some people use these all the time, for flat knitting, which is what this is called, you knit to there, you turn it round, you slide the stitches up there, and you start again. That's all you do. But to make life a bit easier for you to see, because with that fleck going on, it is a bit of a challenge. I've done a sample piece here so you can see what the stitch pattern looks like. Okay, it's much easier to see on this solid colour. So let me show you. I'm going to do a couple of rows to show you how this works. So I'm going to have the pattern in front of me. I'm going to have my stitch counter, and because I'm doing this sort of sideways on as well, where can you see me? Okay, so I'm going to start with my seeded rib. That's down here. So my right side is going to be knit 3. So I've got very long needles here, so I'm going to have to sit at a funny angle. Purl 1, knit 3. I do this 4 times. It's the figures, it's the numbers in the brackets that I'm repeating. So purl 1, knit 3. There we go, I've done my 3 times. So I've come to my first marker. So that's where I need to carry on to the garter stitch. Sorry, the garter check pattern now. So all I do with that marker is move that from the left needle to the right. It goes up with my knitting. It doesn't stay down here like those clip ones do. I want it so I can switch it across, because all I want to do is delineate when I'm changing patterns, okay? So now I go to the first row of my garter check pattern. I know I've got to do knit 2, purl 1, knit 3, 1, 2, 3, purl 1, knit 1. Now I repeat that. I did a smaller version here. I did less repeats to make life a bit easier. I do my purl 1. Oh, what did I do? 1, 2, 3. That should have been a purl, sorry. That's my purl 1. See? Now I do knit 3. Purl 1, knit 1. Now you see I have 1 stitch left, which is my 8 stitch pattern repeat plus the last stitch is knit 1. The beauty of putting your plate stitch markers in here is that if you make a mistake, it's easy to know to just count back and look again. Where did I make the mistake? You haven't got to unpick the whole thing. You can just look back on that section. So now I slip my marker. this is the right front, and on this size, on the size that I'm doing, I would knit 4. Your pattern will tell you if it's a knit 2, knit 6 or knit 4. For my size, although I made this a bit smaller than the full size garment that I'm doing, I kept that repeat. So you've got 3 bits of pattern there. You've got the seeded rib, which forms the front bands. You've got the garter check pattern, and then you've got a few knit stitches which just go into the side seam, and you're never going to see them. Let me come back and quickly do the row 2. So on my wrong side row, I'm going to start with the purl. So I purl 4 here because that's the size I'm doing. I switch my stitch marker across. Now I'm going to do row 2 of the garter check, which starts with a purl, then it's purl 1, knit 5. Oh, Maureen, hi Maureen, thank you for joining. I think your clocks are went back in the UK. Ours have yet to do that, so thank you for joining today. Okay, purl 3. Oh, it's actually purl 2, then purl 1 because I'm starting row. But anyway, you get into the swing. I'm just hurrying along here. So purl 2. Now, because the extra one was at the end of the row, on the right side row, on the wrong side row, I'm meeting my stitch marker exactly where I should. Now I'm just going to do row 2 of the seeded rib. And you need your stitch counter. Purl 1, knit 3. We did a similar type of rib when we did the neck cow. So that's my knit 3, and I should finish with a purl 1, knit 1, which I have done. Wonderful. Okay, so that would be 2 rows for me. Your seeded rib is only 2 rows, so you're always going to be doing row 1 on the right side, row 2 on the wrong side, but you do need to count your garter check rows because they do change. But once you get your stitch counter, your row counter will be super helpful so that you know where you are. You're always going to know with your seeded rib, but you need to keep check of that. Okay, so that's what you're doing. That's what you'll end up with. And you can see why I said if you've got a stitch that's not even, you're not going to see it. You just see the really nice fabric. Okay, so you get started on that. That's plenty of you to do between now and next week if you're doing the kit. And well, next week we'll talk about shaping on the sleeve head, sleeve caps. Now I want to talk a bit about colour. Let's get some of these things out the way for you. So colour is a massive subject. As an image consultant, I'm using colour all the time. It's a huge subject, and I know how important and fascinating it is. But whether you're knitting, crocheting, sewing, it's useful to have an understanding of colour relationships. So when I had my yarn shop, I colour blocked all the yarn, and that means I put all the colours in whatever they were. So all the blues went together, all the reds, the greens, and so on, rather than the generic qualities of the yarn. And what I found that customers didn't always know what they wanted to knit, but they could be influenced by a great colour. And I always knitted items up for the shop display in different colours. Let's show you what I mean. Because, if I can just open that, a garment can look very different in one colour to another. And I found that customers would see a garment maybe knitted up in the pattern in, you know, a lighter colour. So we would knit the display garment up in a different colour. And it's very interesting because often customers didn't realise it was the same garment. And it was. So colour can really change the look of something. So if that's hard enough to pick a solid colour for one item, imagine what it's like picking for several. That can get really tricky. And I'm showing you this book because although it's from back in the 80s, these kind of styles are coming back in again. We're going to see one of the big fashion trends for knitwear for fall and winter this year are kind of 80s style florals, which we had. But look how many colors there are. And you think, oh, that's lovely. I like blues and pinks, but it does get tricky once you're putting them all together. So where do you start? Okay. Oh, this also has another trend with this particular garment. It's on the back as well. There's some tartan. I don't think you can see it there, but there's some tartan around the cuffs. Tartan, argyle, almost 80s type florals. Big trend for fall and winter. So nothing wrong with getting out those 80s books again and replicating those designs. Okay, so where do we start when it comes to picking colors? Well, many of you will have seen or work with color wheels, and it might be you go back to school and you're thinking about the color wheel in your art classes. I need to lift that up so you can see it. So this little device, they're very cheaply available. You can get them online or in hobby stores, anything like that, artists places. That they're not expensive at all, but they're very handy. I use one all the time. But let's just have a brief sort of recap from our school days, maybe, of color theory. And this is really just a very brief overview. So we have the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue. Red, yellow, and blue. Primary colors are the colors from which all others are made. They can't be mixed from any other colors. And I think that in itself is amazing. All the colors in the world derive from these three. So that's our primary colors. Then secondary colors are two primary colors mixed together. So you would have green, which is yellow and blue together, orange, which is red and yellow together, and violet, which is red and blue together. So that's your secondary colors. Then you can go on to tertiary colors and triad colors, all of that. That's getting a bit more advanced, but we won't worry about that now. Warm colors and cool colors. We tend to think of warm colors generally as being orange, reds, and yellows. There's warmth in those. There's a lot of yellow in them. But and blue, cool colors as blues and greens and violets. But any color family can have warm and cool qualities within them. You can get cool reds and you can get warm blues, for example. And in color analysis, personal color analysis, which I do all the time, that's an important factor in somebody's personal coloring. So, complementary colors, and that's complementary spelled with an E, not an I. In color terms, it means that which completes. And essentially, it's the opposites on the color wheel. So the opposite of red is green. The opposite of yellow here is violet. Okay, so on and so on. Yellow or orange, it's blue, violet, and so on and so on. Remember I said that opposites attract. So when you go to the opticians and have your eyes tested, you'll often see they put red and green together on a screen and then black lettering on it. And those colors tend to intensify each other's. Makeup artists use green makeup to counteract redness on light skin tones. Peach and orangey tones neutralize purplish tones on dark skin tones. So color relates to everything we do. There's also value. Value is, we talk about a grayscale scale. Let's hold that up the right way. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? So if you think this relates to any color, and it really talks about the lightness or darkness of a color. A grayscale talks about color in 10 values. So 100% black is value 1. So each step away from that is another value until we get to value 10, which is white. So value 1 and value 10 of any color are the highest value contrasts. So we're talking about just depth, lightness, and darkness. So when you hear about grayscale and value, that's what it means. So I would recommend, when it comes to putting together colours, have things like paint chips to hand. I save, this isn't very attractive in the plastic bag, but I save all my yarn oddments because then I can use them for like playing about with colours. You know, if I want to see how There's two reds here, for example. If I want to see how they relate to each other, yeah, that's too bright. I might want to use that one if I'm using a muted palette of colors, if I'm using a darker value. So keep all your yarn oddments. They're useful for just looking at different colors together. You can use paint chips. If you don't have a color wheel, you can use paint chips. I have a whole collection of color swatches in fabric for my image consulting. And you can also use things like shade cards. These are from my good friends in the UK, John Arbon Textiles. They have their own mill. I visited them in Devon last year. Fantastic place, lovely people. And they spin small batches of yarn. It's really wonderful. Do have a look at their website. But one of the things that they do is a range of their own yarns, and they do this knit by numbers, which I think is fantastic. There's 101 colors, I believe, and a whole different palettes. There's 6 different tones of each palette. So for example, on the turquoises here, or any of these colors really, but the turquoise is a good one to show you, we go from dark to light in 6 different values. Same with the yellows, same with the pinks, the greens, and so on. So have a look online. There are yarn suppliers that sometimes you can print off their color charts of their yarn charts. That's a way of doing it too. It's always nice if you can have something tactile like this. And if I could unpick all these from the chart, but then I've got to remember where to put them back. So unless you have to, I would keep these yarn samples tied to the chart. But the wonder of this is that you can compare. Jenny Edwards has joined. Hi, Jenny. You can actually, play with these colors, see how they relate. Do I want bright? Do I want muted? Do I want lighter or darker? So if you can play with actual yarn samples, that's even better. So again, how do you start? Where do you start? That's because it can be overwhelming. Well, think about what colors you are personally drawn to. What color family are they in? What are your favorites? Do you prefer bright and intense colors or softer muted palettes? If I show you this teal and white fair isle that we've seen before, you can see there's high contrast there between the 2 colors. This is a teal as well. It's slightly different. It's still the same color family, but look how muted that is. Whereas if I brought this same teal in and put white next to it, again, my contrast is much higher. So you might prefer more muted colors. You might like really bright colors. Think about the color families that you like. And when I say that, I'm not talking about individual colors. I'm talking about the color family. Are you drawn to blues? Are you drawn to pinks, as I usually am? Well, start there. Start with a color family that you really like. Now, you might think, well, I fancy like a pop of orange. Yes, that's great, and you might do, and you could probably build that in somewhere if you're combining a lot of colors. But you probably, if you're not used to wearing bright orange, you're probably not going to like it as a fall sweater to start off with. But the other thing to remember with very intense colors like yellow, high energy colors like orange, you don't need a lot of it to make a lot of impact. If you think about high visibility jackets that people wear and emergency services wear, it's usually a strip or a band. You don't need a lot of it. You see it very quickly. That's a whole other explanation of why the eye sees certain colors quickly, but you only need small amounts. So high intensity, high energy colors, you don't need a lot of. Okay, last thing I'm just going to show you, for example, so I have some colors here, and those together are really quite nice. So we have some contrast. There's quite muted colors, we have a contrast. If I bring in the blue and a slate blue, those two go quite well together as well as a 4 together. They're really quite nice. Now I could bring in a 5th color, okay, which is this kind of minky color, which is very pretty. All those look really nice together, and I could make something nice out of that. They're all the same value of color. This is the lightest one. But if I take that light one away, it changes the whole mood of that color palette. It immediately looks lower value, less intense. you actually, in something like this, you need a lighter color somewhere to give it a bit of a pop. So do think about things like that. Take time to play with colors. This hank of yarn, for example, it looks like it's all jewel bright colors. Well, there's a lot of them there, and it's highly saturated, which means there's a lot of strength in the colors, but some of them are actually quite dark. We have some, you know, a blacky brown there. There's a deep kind of green there. But look how bright they look compared to what's next to them. So things like that pop of yellow there and that turquoise, it really sings out, which goes back to what I was saying about you don't need much of some of these high intensity colors to really liven something up. So have fun combining colors, play about with them. I'm sorry we've overrun a bit today, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview. So think about the color families that you like, start there, and then put in other colors. So paint chips are always good, anything you have to hand, but do save your yarn oddments for future use. So I'm going to ask the camera to come back to me. So this episode and all others are uploaded afterwards onto the Knit-O-Matter page. They're also on our YouTube channel, so you can subscribe there, and then they'll just come through to you anyway on the playlist. We're on Instagram. We'd love you to follow us, and of course we're Facebook, so we'd love you to like and share us and get other knitters involved. Everything we do is about helping you progress in your knitting. So I hope this episode was helpful. Do enjoy, if you're doing the Carefree Cardi, do enjoy doing it. If you have any questions, let me know during the week. Next week, as well as another subject, we'll be doing the shaping for the sleeve cap and other elements of the Cardi. So until next week, do stay well, stay safe, stay calm, and keep knitting. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.